Now, the 6 dimensions that we use with Mind Body One are vision, reaction, working memory, stress exposure, mindset management, and mental physicality. We're going to go over each one of those topics and explain briefly what they mean and how you can directly apply them to your population. Now, with vision, 80% of our brain sensory is wired for vision. Obviously, we have touch, taste, smells, proprioception. It goes on, but vision accounts for most of that. And when you think about when we perform in any population, we have to take in the information first. When the information is taken through our eyes, it has to then be processed by the brain, then we make sense of it. Now, something you need to understand is more than just seeing, because seeing is just the actual image that you look at. Vision is how do we get our eyes to that point? How do we make sense of what we see? Do we remember what we see in real time so we can translate that to what we need to do next? It's all important. Or how do our eyes even get to one place to another? When we are in a sport, for example, you don't just stand stationary looking straight ahead, hoping whatever's happening comes towards you. You have to turn your head, turn your eyes, and work in conjunction to make a decision, to make a reaction. And this all starts from the input that you take in. And the quicker and more efficiently that you can do this, the better. Also, you'll learn about things such as visual fielding. What's happening outside of your main center line of vision? Obviously, we need to focus on what's right in front of us. But can we perceive an incoming obstacle, challenge, kick, football, whatever it is, from outside our direct line of vision so we can quickly move out the way or turn towards it and make an action? This is very important because if we're only focusing on what's in front of us, we're going to miss out, and this could be very detrimental performance. So we need to know that these are all aspects that can go into vision. There's much, much more to that. Now, with reaction time, most people simply think you see something and you go. Think about when you're sitting at a stoplight. You're in your car, foot on the brake, and sometimes you see a car in your peripheral, remember we just talked about with vision, and it moves a little bit, then you let off the brake and then put on the gas because you thought it was time to go. Now, you see how this plays in conjunction, and these all are interrelated, so this is a perfect example. But when that light goes from red to green, that's when we're signaled to go. We're responding to an external stimulus. Now, there's different types of reaction. That particular one would be simple reaction. Is see one stimulus and make an action to that. Now, there's other types that we talk about in our course, such as choice reaction and recognition reaction. Understanding these different types of reaction will allow you to manipulate your programming, because just like with physical fitness, you do the same stimulus over and over. Eventually, you will adapt and you will get stronger, but it'll kind of plateau and won't do as much to adapt after that. It's the same thing with the mental performance. We can't just show one stimulus and think that's going to be enough. We have to change how much stimuli we're attending to. We got to change what each stimuli means. So it's not meaning just go when you see it. It could mean don't go. And that's a whole nother topic when we talk about impulse control and inhibition by not responding to unwanted stimuli. This is important because reaction sets the stage for everything else. Because once we can attend to something, we have our attention, whether it be visual or auditory, we know we can do the next step. A lot of times, whether it be sport, tactical, or just everyday life, people speak on situational awareness. Now, what does that truly mean? When we're situationally aware, that means we're able to respond to what's going on around us. This could be visually through our peripherals. It could be auditory through our ears. It could be kinesthetic when we feel something creeping from behind. Whatever it may be, how we react will set the tone on what we do next.
C3H5. 1 plus 1. 2 plus 2.
Now, working memory. So working memory is a very interesting one because I like to say it's our bench press for our brain. Now, when I say bench press, I don't mean this is the one end all be all exercise, but just like with the bench, people usually in fitness say, how much do you bench, to have some kind of metric or standard for strength. Now, obviously we have deadlift, squats, there's other exercises we can use, but colloquial speaking is usually the bench people ask for. But the same concept, we're looking at working memory. This load allows us to do more. Working memory is being able to take in information real time in that short period, about 30 seconds to a minute, and manipulate what's happening so you can make a next action. Because we talked about how reaction lets us know what to do, what's happening, what's going on, then we can choose to respond. So that's only part of the battle. The next step is making sense of real time of what's going on in that scene, but translating long-term memory, what we know and how to execute, what are our skill sets, and transferring that back and forth so we can understand how to react. Like in a game or a sport, say a quarterback, for example, they know the play. That's committed to long-term memory. They know what routes the receivers are running. They know the schemes of the blockers in front of them. But if the play unfolds in a way that's not typical. They may have to roll out, scramble, but they still have to know where the receiver is going to be. So that's meaning they're taking real-time information, relaying what they already know, and making decisions because it's going to be ever-changing. A simpler way to look at working memory is, let's say, for example, I'll just give you my phone number, 954-708-8792. You might repeat that in your head over and over until you type it in your phone or maybe write it down. This is working memory at a simpler form because now you have to utilize that inner voice of saying it in an auditory manner, but we also have visual working memory. We see something like when we describe an address of directions to go somewhere, we might say make a left on the corner. There's a big building that's red. So you have to actually paint that picture internally. Now, since reaction sets the stage, working memory allows you to perform in the act. So make sure you work on these things because these require drills that require you to hold different loads of information at a time so you can execute.
Now I gotta try better than that. Think that's really gonna cut it? You really think you can do this? Man, please.
Stress exposure. So when we expose ourselves to a similar type of cue or stimuli that we would see in a real performance, a real match, a real scenario, it gets our brain to acclimate what will happen. Because if we don't get used to the scenarios outside of just the act that we're doing, we won't know how to handle it when it really occurs. I use an analogy that I call the tourist versus the resident. Say, for example, you went to a different country. Let's say you've never been to Paris. So you go to Paris, France, you're seeing all the different sites, you're seeing the art in the Louvre, you're seeing the Bastille, you see the Eiffel Tower. This is all amazing, it's all new to you. Now, for a person who's never been in a stressful situation that need to get used to, that could be overwhelming. In the case of the tourists, they're overwhelmed in a fun way because they're learning, they're experiencing. But in a performance, this could be detrimental because if you're not aware because you're seeing in real time what's going on, this is taking away from what you need to focus on and execute. Now, on the other side, the resident, if they live in Paris, while the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, the Bastille are monuments, Notre Dame, these are big things for tourists. If you live in Paris and you see these things, it's not going to be that big a deal, right? So you're going to see them as, okay, this is my everyday route. This is my everyday activity. I'm used to that. You know how to get there. You don't have to look up directions. This is what you want to be in a stressful situation. That's why stress exposure is an important part of our methodology because we want you to get used to the stressor so it becomes your default mode. And we say that because when we're in a high stress situation or just a stressful situation in general, we revert to a lesser level of performance. That's right. We're never going to perform at the highest level when the action really pops off. But the goal is, can we get you high as possible on your level of performance? So if you practice in conditions that are less adequate, more noise, more distractions, less resources, this will get you used to not having what you need. But when you get in that situation and you may have more, now you're able to go either way. The goal is to make your worst better because you're going to revert to that default mode. This is why people practice in these stressful situations because it can impact you emotionally, psychologically, physically, and socially, and it'll cause detriment to all aspects of your performance. A lot of times we talk about a breakdown in performance or choking or whatever it may be. We negate the fact that there's a mental component and this can be affected directly by how you perceive and acclimate to stress. Mindset management. Now, this refers to how we dispose ourselves to different stimulus in a psychological manner. What's going inside our head, our thoughts, our emotions, how do we regulate them? So for example, who are you when it's time to perform? When we talk about this in the course, personality is a big concept. What traits are needed to execute? Can you identify the traits that you already possess? Are they doing good for you? Are they being detrimental to you? Figure that out and you can tweak them because it's not necessarily saying you have to change who you are, but you got to understand any deficits or highlights that you have so you can either play on the highlights or improve the deficits. If you're not a very extroverted person and this impacts your ability to perform in front of crowds, guess what? You need to build on your extroversion and do things that put you in more social settings because oftentimes when we talk about something like extroversion, it's chalked up to just being the life of the party on the scene. But what it really means is what kind of disposition or feelings do you have in social scenarios? Are you comfortable in social settings? Are you able to maneuver? Are you able to utilize your skill sets at its best ability in social settings? It may not be ideal. You might be a little uncomfortable, but if you can do that, that's what we need. Now, some people are introverted, but they can still execute in an extroverted manner when it's time to perform because they understand what deficits they have and they work on those things. Just like you can practice physical attributes, speed, strength, jumping ability, you can practice how to be more extroverted and other personality traits that we go over in the course. Now, also, do you use your emotions effectively? Now, emotions are not something we can just get rid of. If you see something that shocks you in real life, you might jump, you might wince, you might yell even. Now, does this mean that you're weak? No. But in a scenario where that can be detrimental, you need to calm that down. And the same thing in a performance, whether it be a sport, a job interview, whatever it may be, because when you show these emotional dispositions on your face or your body language, the opponent or the person across from you can take this in, and this could be negatively affecting your performance. So you need to be able to use your emotions to your advantage. For example, anxiety is looked at as a bad thing. Anxiety to an overwhelming amount can be a bad thing, but you need a little bit because that lets your body know physically that it needs to do something. That's the sympathetic nervous system getting you ready for action, the fight or flight response. You need some of that if you're going to perform at a high level. It's just a matter of, can you use those to your advantage? Because if you go too high on that spectrum, you'll overthink things and make little mistakes. If you go too low on the spectrum and don't get ready enough, then you're going to miss out because you're not really trying. So find that balance and using your emotions effectively, not getting rid of them, but effectively. Don't give away your disposition to the opponent. Don't let them know you're nervous. Use that effectively and transfer that in a way that maybe could intimidate them or keep it stoic, and just that way they don't know and they're always guessing. Now, the last part we'll speak on here on mindset management is how do you set the tone for your thoughts? Now, this could be something like being motivated or goal setting. Motivation is not necessarily this catch-all term of just being able to do whatever you want. It's more so using the energy effectively to dictate the actions that are needed or the behaviors to execute said task. Because if I plan out how to go about the skill or go about the performance, it's not going to say it's perfect, but it gives me the idea, the mindset. Because a lot of times we talk about motivation or even confidence, and it seems as this mystical term, but we can really put ourselves in position to be more motivated or more confident. We're typically more motivated and confident when we understand what we're dealing with, when we planned it out a little bit, went through it. So this kind of relates back to the stress exposure. You can see how these keep intertwining, and that's what our methods are all about. So you got to make sure that you plan out what could go right. Do you plan out what you need? Do you plan out how long you need to practice? Do you plan out what could go wrong? A lot of people just plan out the outcome. What about the process? That's what it takes to do it day to day, week to week. And the performance is, how do we set benchmarks so we can execute and know this is where we need to be at this point in time or place? So these are things to take in consideration when we're talking about managing our mindset. And the last of the 6 is mental physicality. So with mental physicality, we're talking about how are you able to think while in a moving state. Now, if you're playing a sport, there's a lot of that going on. You got to process where to go, where to look, going back to vision, how to react, how to manage the stress of everything else going on, but still be able to move efficiently with your body left to right, front to back in a very explosive, sometimes dynamic way, depending on sport you play. Now, in a non-sport aspect, if you're working with, say, a tactical population, it's the same thing. Because if they're in a firefight or something of that nature, they really have to be able to think while moving, because it could be very dire life or death situations. To the everyday person, whether it's driving, going to work, you have to be able to execute in a way that your brain and body have to be in sync. Now, another part of that is, how do you do well in the long-term durations of physiological and psychological endurance? The more you got to think, the longer you have to think, the more you got to move, the longer you have to move, the more wear and tear it does on your body, the easier it is to break down mentally and obviously physically. So you don't want any of these to go awry, but obviously we're not invincible. So we have to be able to mitigate those so we can test and perform in ways that have to challenge our physical well-being while having to move and think. So we know, okay, after this much time physically, this is where our thought process goes down, or vice versa. After this much time thinking and challenging our mindset, our physical component may go down, or both. We have to know how our mental component is effective to the other, because these can be detrimental to the overall performance. So I want to thank you guys once again for tuning in. Like I said, these are the 6 essentials of mental performance. These are the concepts that we use to train the best minds in the world, whether it be UFC stars Juliana Pena or Dustin Poirier, military soldiers, law enforcement, students, corporate wellness, all athletes of all type. The list really goes on. So whatever your population may be, these methodologies will help them perform better. Now, in our Foundations of Cognitive Conditioning course, you'll learn more about these methods, and not just the bare minimum of the 6 facets, but the deeper understanding of exercise physiology, psychology, neuroscience, athletic performance, and much, much more. So you can take these 6 facets and go about it with your population, because when you have that deeper understanding of the science of these different sub-facets, you'll be able to apply them in whatever manner you see fit. So thanks again for tuning in, and get your mind right.